Lokashankaram Shankaram Shankaracharyam Keshavam Badarayanam Sutra Bhashya Kritau Vande Bhagavantau Punah Punaha Ishvaro Gururatmeti Murti Bheda Vibhagine Vyomavatyapta Dehaya Dakshina Murtaye Namaha Gukarastvandhakaro Vai Rukarastvanivartakaha Andhakara Nirodhitvat Gururitya Vidhiyate Sadashiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So we begin a new topic today in this Vedantic Insights class. And I thought that we would make a change in the way we are taking the topic. We'll come back to the main topic of understanding Vedanta. But for this segment, I thought we will do the text which I had talked about before, and I think there was a possibility, called Gyanankusham. Gyanankusham, which is the text that I think I first read in year 2011, so about 11 years back, and I've read it a couple of times since then. And I thought that this will give us a change of pace, so to speak. We will come back to Vedanta. This is also connected to Vedanta, but it focuses on sadhana for Vedantins. So some introductory remarks and then we will go into it. So this is a book which you will find a little hard to swallow from time to time. I think that thought would come to you as it came to me also. Really? How can I do this? That kind of a reaction or response, not reaction, but a response, so the mental response will come to you. Hopefully not, but may come to you. It's a little tough. It's a tough message, but something that we can grow into. I remember the first time I read it, I wasn't sure that I would stomach it. I would really absorb it. But the more I think about it, I think it makes sense. And for us to not rebel against it and to give it some thought is very beneficial to us, as it has been to a certain extent for me also. So now this book here, Gyanankusham, as I mentioned, it's a very tough message, and also, this is a very important thing to see, it is meant for a Vedanta student. A Vedanta student. So, not any student, but Vedanta student. So, Paramatma Jnana Vedanta student, Shishya. So, which really sets us apart from the majority of the people that we interact with. They're not really directly trying to understand Paramatma in their own mind. They are in some extent, in some fashion or the other, so it's not as though we're looking down on them. That's not the case. But to become a mumukshu, moktumichu, a desirer of freedom, you have to understand the very basic principle of praptasya praptihi, natu apraptasya praptihi. This is what we really talk about it again and again. We did that in the beginning of the Vedantic insights and in all the ones, this is a very important thing, that the problem we are solving in life is of the type of already with me but not understood. This is what is called a Vedantic student versus a non-Vedantic student. Because we all start with the premise that a sense of well-being is something that comes from interacting with the world correctly, of course, correctly. Eating well, taking care of the health, interacting with people, all of that is concerned with anatma vicharaha, the worldly vicharaha. A student of Vedanta, on the other hand, is atma vichari. Let's do atma vichara as we have been doing in the previous segments of the Vedantic insights. So now the ground rules for this book are, many of the things that we will see are really meant for Vedanta students. Atma vichara, not for anatma vichara. It may also become applicable, but it wouldn't make nearly as much sense to a person who is not a atma vichari. So this is an important thing that please keep in mind, and I'll remind you from time to time, again and again, that this is what needs to be done. Okay, so here we will start this book. Quite frankly, no one has talked about where these 25 verses came from. I don't think anybody really has. Maybe it is there. I haven't, at least Swami Maheshananji didn't talk about it. And if he had talked about it, I mean, if he knew, he would have talked about it, but he didn't. Instead, there is a commentary on it. It's a Vyakhya. Vyakhya means a general commentary. Bhashya means a special commentary by Adi Shankara called Bhashya. All other commentaries are called Vyakhya. So for example, in the Bhagavad Gita also, the commentary by Adi Shankara is called Gita Bhashya. Whereas the commentary on the Bhagavad Gita by Sri Shankarananda is called Vyakhya, not Bhashya. This is the tradition. We follow the tradition very well. That doesn't mean that the Bhashya is better than the other, or Vyakhya or not. It all depends. It all depends on, because all of these commentaries are written with different viewpoints. Some of them are meant to negate Purva Paksha. Like the prominent Purva Paksha is, of course, Buddhism and Jainism. So some of them are written with respect to keeping them in mind, the kind of arguments that they present and so on. Some of them don't really look in, they consider the Purva Paksha but doesn't make it front and center. Instead, they are providing a much more detailed commentary on the very meaning of the textbook. So here Swami Shankarananda's book, which is just an absolute marvelous commentary on the Bhagavad Gita. And I'm really studying it from the beginning. I've already studied like 3 or 4 different chapters, number 7, number 8, number 9. And I decided this is so good, I want to start from the very beginning. So I will start with chapter number 2, which is where the teaching is. So these are all different vyakhyas. So there is a vyakhya on Gyanankusham. And it's called Vivaranam. And there is some disagreement as to who the author is. We are really not very good at writing down, we don't concern ourselves with a very accurate historical record. The ideas are there, And where it came from really doesn't matter, as long as there is a continuity of thought. The parampara has to be maintained. So here also the Vyakhya, I think the introduction to this book also says that it is generally believed that it is written by Adi Shankara, this Vyakhya that we are going to be studying. But there is no complete agreement to that. A lot of people feel no. Nevertheless, the Vyakhya has been so useful that it has been followed by a number of teachers, and Swami Maheshanandji talked about it to some people, which was then transcribed and written into a book, and this book came out in the year 2010. So it was fairly new when I studied it, or 2011, and so that's the background for the book. So there are 25 verses, as I mentioned before, and I think what I'm going to do is, in addition to the introduction to the Gyanankusham today, I may not take all 25 of them. I think I have studied recently, I forget where my bookmark is. I think I've gone, I'm at number 22 or something. I have a few more to do. But I may just take a sampling, especially in how long it might take. I don't want to make it too long. So then I have some other topics that I want to really go to. Amongst the prominent ones that I'm thinking of in the future are the last 5 chapters of Panchadashi, the Ananda. I mentioned that to you, and we haven't come to it yet, but I do want to do it. So I don't want to spend too much time on this. Again, I think as we are doing in the Brahma Sutra, instead of taking every sutra, I think if we got a feel for how it is presented and how to think is the main thing. That will be good. So this is what I'm going to do in Brahma Sutra. Here also in Gyanankusham, I may not do all 25, but I think we will do enough that you get a sense of where the advice is coming from and how to think about the advice. So this is what my plan is. We'll see about that. Okay, so with that, also another thing, since I think I talked about it, there are 2 or 3 students that actually found that this book is on the internet, and they got PDF copies of it. And this is a Hindi translation of the Vyakhya by Swami. Not a translation, it's actually a commentary on the Vyakhya by Swami Maheshanandji. And so this is available. What I would say is you don't need it. You don't need it. For the Hindi-speaking people, if you want to get a copy of that and read along with me, you're welcome to do so. But really, you don't need it, because I would say rather not even go into the book. Because I'm going to present the ideas in a form which is digestible by householders like you and I. This is what I'm going to do. So you don't really need to do that. Don't worry about the text and so on. It's the concepts contained in it which I hope to be able to explain to you as we go along. Okay, so that's that. Okay, so now a few words about which I've already done, I think, in some other classes. The word Gyanankusham. So Jnana, of course, means knowledge. Ankusham means a tough, sharp instrument in the form of jnanam. So as you know very well, not know very well, I've mentioned that to you before, I also didn't know this, that the analogy here is that with an elephant. And as we saw in Gajendra Moksha, in Vishnu Purana, There we saw Swami Tattvavedananda ji has had spent a lot of time one time on one of his visits on Gajendra Moksha. So there we saw that the elephant in the animal kingdom is in some ways quite similar to the human being kingdom. Human kingdom. The human species, animal species and human species. How we all have quite a awakening of our own nature. So, for example, in the case of a smaller animal like an ant, they also have a knowledge of their surroundings and an innate desire for longevity and food. They also know that I'm hungry, I better eat something, and here there is some danger and I better protect myself. They also have it. But what the elephant has in addition, which is quite abundant, is a sense of I am a big person and I am kind of like the biggest animal there is, and people cannot really, they should not and they don't bother me. I am the king. In some ways, a human being does the same thing. We all are very proud of the fact that we are the most intelligent species in the world, and then we can do a number of things. I'm not suggesting that the elephant also has enough wisdom to understand the totality of what it is, that it doesn't. But just from the standpoint of having a pride in its own personality, it's very similar. Okay, so this is number one. The second thing is that normally the elephant behaves rationally. So it has children, and the parents take care of the children, lead them in processions. They go to the right places where grass is available. It's a vegetarian. It's a vegetarian animal. This is what Swamiji used to say. Swami Dayanand ji used to say that for those of us that have this feeling that we cannot survive without protein or animal protein, not any protein. We do have to have some protein. Are wrong, because the fastest animal in the world, which is a horse, and the biggest animal in the world, which is an elephant, both are vegetarian. So we don't have to say that we have to eat meat to survive. No. So the elephant can lead the procession to the right places where grass is available, on some other leaves and so on. It behaves very rationally. It understands where I am, understands who my family is, and they behave predictably, very friendly actually. Once in a while, something happens to them where they lose their self-control. And so this is what is called a rogue elephant. And God help people when you see a rogue elephant. This is very well documented, that a rogue elephant becomes irrational. It does not know what it's doing. It may know what it's doing. It destroys things. It destroys trees, any beings that come in its way, houses, whatever comes its way. It is powerful and destructive. And sometimes they say that up to a certain point, this is what I was going to say, that the mahout, the person who is controlling the elephant, can use Ankusham, So the Ankusham here is a very sharp instrument with a pointed, it is made of a metal with very pointed, sharp ends. And it is the mahout actually hits the elephant at a particular point on it, exactly where I don't even know, and keeps on hitting it until what is called a mada, which is some kind of a liquid. The liquid is generated when it gets mad, is taken out of the elephant. You keep on hitting it, and so on and so forth until the mother comes out, and then slowly the elephant calms down. And Swami Maheshananji says that there are cases where even that doesn't happen. In fact, as soon as the mahout goes on top of the elephant, it gets so mad it throws him off. And in which case there is nothing that you can do. You can have to tranquilize it. You have to put it inside a big hole, build a big hole, put it inside, tranquilize it, and let it sleep over it, and then it becomes calm. So we have the same issue when it comes to anger, that we become irrational. We don't know what is wrong, what is right, what is the right way to go do things, are completely forgotten. Something gets into us that makes us behave in a very strange fashion. Happens all the time. The road rage is a great example. Any kind of a fight, just this in San Jose just happened in a restaurant, Victoria restaurant in San Jose, where two people got into the fight, and one of them took the gun out, and then finally the police had to come in and so on. They showed a video of that. So once that happens, road rage is a good example. Really, so what happens is that your car got damaged. You're okay. The car got damaged, and you think it is the other person. And the other person thinks, no, it's your fault. And the two of them can come to a point where one, if you have gun, and this is the problem in this country, because anger is everywhere. But anger in the US takes on a special form because you have access to a gun. You're almost anxious to use it sometime or the other. You bought it at a big price and it's just sitting there doing nothing. But this is a great opportunity. You just shoot the other person in anger. So about 3 or 4 months ago, I was, my wife and I had lunch with a couple in Portola Valley. So we had just come out of this restaurant and we had gone different cars. My wife had her own car and I came, she had to go someplace else, and I just got into my new car that I bought, the Mustang Mach-E, back in May of last year. And so I was in that car. And as I was backing out, so I had parked and I backed out, and I backed out like this, and then I was going to go. Suddenly I saw a boom in the back of the car. And I think what happened was, the best I can remember, that this other person was also backed out because there was a car coming out. And so he thought that he would back up and let the other car come out and then he can get into his. So I was standing still and he hit me. And it was a big bang. I was okay. It was not that big a bang, but the bumper got broken. And so we both came out and so on. And of course, I didn't say very much, but this guy said, "Sir, it is your fault." I said, "I was there first. I was standing still." He says, "No, you are moving." I could tell this is So thank goodness I had the sense to say, okay, where's your insurance card? Where is my insurance card? We'll let them decide. And so it became a shared thing, even though he was at fault. But it's not worth doing it. I just came home and I was just calm about it. Oh, it's okay. Whatever happened, happened. It's no big deal. So the anger unmanaged, and it could really, if the ego gets involved, and you can really do damage to each other. So the comparison between the elephant and the human being is being brought out here. So just like there is a Mahout who with an Ankusham, here the Ankusham is Jnanam. And so Jnanam here, as we will see in the very first introductory verse, is a way of thinking which is compatible to ultimately to the fact that the self is not involved. It's compatible with that fact. But here the Jnanam is a way of thinking that protects you from problems to pursue your goal. So this is what is called a Gyanankusham. So here the Sanskrit derivation would be Jnanam eva Ankusham. Ankusham, which is in the form of knowledge. The knowledge means that the advice given saying, when you become angry, this is the way to calm yourself down. This is the way. Think about it in this way. And so these are the advices this is the advice which is very tough. And in the beginning you say, why should I think this way? Because you want to protect praptasya prapti. And so here, Swami Maheshananji says that when we talked about the elephant being rational, being reasonable, and really under control of the situation and so on, goes about it in a normal way. So this is what is called sanmarga. Sanmarga. So sanmarga means the right way. So we'll go into the sanmarga in a second. But I do want to talk about one other thing. So even in human beings, there are three types of tendencies which the Bhagavad Gita also says leads to problems. So much so that if you don't correct them, your next life may be in Naraka, in really hell. Because the hell is a place where tough medicine is given to you. It's kind of like a hospital, a tough hospital where you have to work and whatever I don't know anything about all the details. I'm just saying it's a negative experience. There are three ways of walking into a door for Naraka. One is Kama, the second one is Lobha, and the third one is Krodha. Unmitigated desire. Lobha means greed and Krodha means anger. And of course the one which is most damaging, not only later but even now in this life itself, is the last one, which is called Krodha. So here Swami Maheshananji points out that much of the advice given in the Gyanankusham also applies to Kama and Lobha. But because it is looking at understanding the worst case, which is anger, this is what is concentrated on. Okay, so that's the other thing. So now let's go to the next one. You know what? Let me do this. I was thinking about it. So the way these 25 verses is, so before going into the explanation of anything more, let's look at the first verse. So here, I just want to show it to you. You will see a 2-line verse in Sanskrit here. And then this is the Vivaranam, the Vyakhya in Sanskritam. And then after that is Swami Maheshananji's commentary on the Vivaranam. Vyakhya is called Vivaranam. In fact, you see the very top, it says Savivaranam. Savivaranam means that this book also gives the Vivaranam exactly as it is, the Vyakhya. So for those of you that want to really study the Sanskritam, you're welcome to do so. But I am not going to go into that. I just want to go into the conceptual aspects of it. But anyway, so this is the how we will see all 25 verses. Okay, now let's look at the first verse. So I'll just pronounce just the first verse. I won't do this every time. It says, Mahatmanam Satvavashat Vyavasthiti Dridha Parigyana Samahita Atmanam Para Apareshutu Madriga Atmanam Samayayet Kalpayana Gyanankusham. Difficult Sanskrit, not easy. Anyway, this is just a 2-line. So, the meaning of that, which I will just translate. So, because Swami Maheshananji has, I forgot to mention that after the Vivaranam, before his Hindi Vyakhya, he summarizes in the text form what the meaning of the verse is. So the central part of that is given here. Then he explains in his own way. Okay? So the first verse says, by virtue of a lot of thinking, the Mahatmas whose mind has been rendered totally under control and is pure, Sattva Guna, Pradhana. Those Mahatmas, when they are confronted with bad conduct by anyone, nothing happens to them. I'll read the Hindi for those of you that understand Hindi. परिज्ञान द्वारा जिनका मन समाहित हो चुका है, उन महात्माओं की तो परायों के दुर्व्यवहार होने पर भी मन की सुस्थिति अंतःकरण की शुद्धि से ही संभव हो जाती है। लेकिन हम जैसों के मन रूप हाथी को इस कल्पना के द्वारा वश में कर लाना चाहिए। This is what it says in Hindi. So it says that, listen, it says several things. One is, it says that the Mahatmas, after a lot of work on their part, through a lot of vichara, a lot of thinking, a lot of abhyasa, a lot of practice, not easy, shravanam, mananam, nididhyasanam, all that, have now gotten their mind in such a shape that if someone severely misbehaves with them, and we will see plenty of examples of misbehaves with them, nothing happens to them. They are not disturbed about it. However, for the rest of us, like an elephant, how to get our mind to cope with these durvyavahara. Durvyavahara means terrible conduct towards us, not against somebody else, but towards us. And somebody severely upsets us, which normally would be reason for us to get angry. With what kalpana? So this word kalpana is used here. So it's a very interesting one. I'll explain that a little bit later. By what imaginative thinking? I can just explain it right now. This is imaginative thinking. Not this is clever thinking. Because now you have the possibility of becoming irrational, which will be hurting you and perhaps hurt others too. But forget about others, it is your own self. And what kind of creative thinking can you do that acts like an Ankusham? This is the first verse. And so then Swami Maheshanji spends probably most of several pages, let's see, I don't know, maybe about 10 pages on this verse. For the other verses he doesn't spend as much time because this is an introduction. So here he talks about by what method do the Mahatmas come to that point. So we'll briefly talk about all of this, not in great detail. Okay, so one thing that this verse points out is that this is not just theoretical talk. Where does it say that? It says that the Mahatma has already achieved it. Not as though you say, I think these things are kind of nice on the paper, but they're very difficult to achieve. Very difficult to achieve. I don't think that it's possible for anybody to really come to that. We will all go through this because there's some very difficult things talked about here. Even today we'll go to the verse number 2, hopefully, then first one. First real example on how the problem arises and what we solve about it. But here it says by citing that please don't think that this is just theoretical, because people are, you see this. It can be done. It should be done. It will be done. So that's how it starts with the example of the Mahatma and goes into a lot of detail on how they did it. I'll just give you one real life story that I heard in Rishikesh. I was there several years back, I don't know, maybe about 15 years back, when I used to go there for Mahashivaratri every time, when Swamiji will give Diksha to some new Swamis. And I'll spend a week with Swamiji in the classes and so on. So when we were there, so there were several Mahatmas who used to live, still do. So the ashrams that Swami Dayanandji has created is also a place where older Mahatmas are housed and given food and taken care of until they depart from the body. So there were several, and very interestingly enough, I remember this so well. We were sitting in the morning class, from 8 to 9:30 or 8 to 9:15, pretty much our morning class timing in Rishikesh. And as the class was starting and Swamiji was saying prayers, one of the brahmacharis walked up to him and gave him a piece of paper. So Swamiji was still doing the prayers as we do, but then because somebody had walked up to him and given him a piece of paper, he decided to open it and read it. He was quiet for just a few minutes, for just very short, just read the thing. Then he put it down, then he kept teaching. So the whole class went just as he had planned ahead of time. When the class ended, he made an announcement that the senior most, the oldest Mahatma living there just passed away. This is during his breakfast time, so it must have happened within between 7:30 and 8 o'clock. Because before that, Swamiji would have known he had not come to the class yet. So it happened literally at that time. And he talked about this Mahatma. And one of the stories about this Mahatma, which is very relevant here, very interesting, we will see this. I think it was either Swamiji talked about it or maybe one of the other Swamis talked about it. I don't remember. But in any case, what happened was, it's a real story. It was winter time, and winters in Rishikesh are very, very cold. It's in the Himalayas, and there is no central heating. No central heating. So imagine you're inside your room at 45 degrees. And so this Mahatma had two blankets and some rajai also, but a blanket. And so when he went back to his room, he couldn't find a blanket. So he asked somebody, has somebody, because it's very strange, he's usually lying down during the day and so on. Blanket was not there. So he called somebody and he says, have you seen, what happened to it? Is somebody washing it or what? So one of the watchmen said, oh my God. He says there was a village person who came in and I saw him with blanket underneath his arm and he was just walking away very fast. And I didn't know who he was. He just looked very confident and he had it. He says, I'm sure he has stolen it. This is the story. This is the background. So now look at the response from the Swami. He says, oh my gosh, I am so sorry. Do you know that was a very old blanket, smelly blanket. What is he going to do with that blanket? How could he not have come to us and said, I need a blanket? We would have given him a new one. This is the story. Not for a minute he said, oh my gosh, I've lost my blanket. All he was concerned with is, my poor thief is stuck with a smelly blanket when I think if he had just approached us, I'm sure we could have managed giving him a new blanket. This is the kind of response. So this citing of the Mahatmas here is very real. It's not theoretical. This is the point that I think this first one is making. Okay, let me see some of the points that I want to make. 8:45. So here it says that the Vedantic student, all this is addressed to a person who is already understood praptasya prapti, turning towards Ishvara's presence in myself. It's not Ishvara's presence in myself It is Ishvara Swarupa which I have taken to be myself, really. So this is the goal of the Vedantic student. So the Vedantic student is going on a path which says Sanmarga. Sanmarga. Sanmarga means a correct direction. So here one Sat, sun here, because of Sandhi, Sat becomes sun. The sun means Paramatma. Sat Swarupaha Satyam Jnanam Anantam. So Sanmargaha means a direction where you will find the truth. So this is where the student is going. But a student that has not yet controlled his or her anger, because we are all at that point, we haven't really completely controlled it, but we are getting to that point, reverses from the Sanmarga. It's like you're supposed to go towards Los Angeles and all of a sudden you go towards Fresno, some other direction, which is the wrong thing to do. So you have to come back again and travel towards, this is what anger does, Swamiji says. So, and then here one other thing he says is that if you are angry, you have two ways of countering it. One is by Hatha Yoga. As you are getting angry, you don't like the fact that you are losing control, and you stiffen up, and then you somehow become quiet, and you say, this is not good. I'm getting angry. Either you blurt out something to people, in which case you will have to say, oh my gosh, why did I say that? Is that I said that? I'm so sorry. Why should I do that? So you have some prayaschita. But in any case, your whole approach towards controlling anger is that of self-control. The Swamiji says, this does not work. Unless you go to the source of the anger, by simply confronting it and trying to negate it with your personality may help. It's not as though it is totally useless. That's not what we're saying. But for all intents and purposes, it doesn't solve the problem. So here, Swami Maheshananji is very fond of pointing this out. He says this is very much like the taking of samadhi by a person who hasn't understood the self. You somehow force yourself through pranayama and through sitting, through asana, quietening your mind down, and you're happy with it, and so on and so forth. And which is good, you have a good samadhi for 20 minutes, 25 minutes, half hour, whatever. And then it's over. And you open your eyes, and then you look at things, what needs to be done, and then your estimation of who you are, that I am a samsari, occasionally able to do samadhi, and now I'm back into the samsara. You go back to the same old thing. So this is kind of like, in a way, is a yoga which is temporary. This is what we do in our life, that when you feel some desire, when you have greed, when you have even some anger, you try to do things to neutralize them. And it works many times. It works. But this is very different. This is not neutralizing anything. It is to understand the very strange nature of how anger comes in. And it is an invitation for you to think about Atma, Anatma, Viveka. Who am I? What is my nature? What is the nature of the world? How are things related to me? How they are not related to me? So the anger is, as this will show up in many of the other verses, that anytime you have something bad happens to you, it is actually doing you a favor, because you are otherwise not thinking. You're just trying to avoid problems, and in living in a kind of like a make-believe world that I'm okay. And fine, congratulations that you're okay most of the time. But you haven't solved anything. You haven't solved all the changes that are going to come. Death eventually. What is going to happen? So just to be blasé about things by not confronting is a problem. And so as he will show this, that anytime somebody gives you a problem, it is a gift from God for you to think about. Anyway, we are getting it ahead of ourselves. There will be others that will come in. So this is not how a Mahatma is made. He came out with a very interesting story here. So he says, and so this is very well known in India, because we have all these sadhus. I gave you a story about the sadhu with a couple of their brahmacharis, and when he was, remember, he went to the back door and was knocking, and so this man comes out and gives him all kinds of, he says, you are good for nothing, you just go work. And so we remember talking, something like that, another story. This Mahatma knocks on the door, and the lady of the house comes out and said, yes, what do you want? So he says, lady, if you have any food, we would like to have it. He says, you are begging for food? You look like you are strong, you have a strong body and so on. Why don't you work? I don't understand. Why are you begging? So the Mahatma says, okay, madam, it's all right. So he starts to walk away. And then she says, all right, come. I'll give it to you anyway. So the Mahatma came back and was standing there. Then she gave him a second time. And he says, you know what? I gave you bad words to use, that you are good for nothing and so on. If I were you, I would never have come back. And then you come back again for some more? What kind of a person you are? Don't you have any shame? Don't you have any sense of and so on and so forth? You're a terrible person, even worse than I thought. So the Mahatma said, okay, madam, I'm sorry, I'm just leaving. Then she calls him back and says, guess what? I think you are a great Mahatma, because I gave you gali means some bad words, twice, and both times you didn't react and you went away. I think you are a great Mahatma. So the Mahatma said, lady, can I tell you something? Don't liken me to a dog. She says, what do you mean? I didn't liken you to a dog. He says, yes, you did. So what happens is that the dog comes to you for some food, and you take a stick out and you start beating it, and the dog runs away. Then the food is still there, and when the stick is removed, the dog comes back again. And then you give it another stick. So he says the dog also came back a couple of times. And so it reacts to what you're saying. I am different. I'm not like a dog. All I wanted was a lifestyle, because I'm not supposed to cook on something. If you can give it to me, fine, otherwise okay. So your definition that I'm a Mahatma is totally wrong. You are likening me to a dog. That's not who I am. And finally, this is how the dialogue ended. So now we can see so I think we have pretty much covered this. There are a couple of more thoughts that we could do. Yeah, so the only other thought, and then we will finish this verse and then go to verse number 2, where a real example is given. This is just an introduction. Is that here the word kalpana is used in the verse. So Swamiji says the word kalpana should not be construed as something that you have to imagine. Although this method of removing your anger is creative, but kalpana should not be saying that it is not factual. What does happen is that the first time you think about it, it doesn't help you that much, because the vasanas from your previous thinking are so strong that by invoking this Gyanankusham, it is very weak at this point. But the whole idea is that you just do this again and again, and what you will see is that over time this becomes a reality. This is what our life is. I think in our life, in my life also, my improvement is slow and gradual. But it is there. I feel it. So I'm going in the right direction. And so now what I'm able to do, I was not able to do 10 years, 20 years ago. So this is the fact about this word. Kalpana means that you just own it, even though it is not true. That example we have given is that if you want to swim, you have to pretend you're swimming for a while until you get it. So something like that. And finally, I think we've already talked about it, that there are two margas, there are two methods of controlling anger. One would be yoga marga and the other one is vichara marga. So we've already talked about this. This is just a summary. Yoga marga is tough it out. Not the way to do it. I mean, if you want to tough it out, that's fine. Bite your tongue and don't say something that you feel like saying. That's okay. But do vichara marga by thinking. And by thinking alone, you attack the very root of the problem. Really, this whole Gyanankusham, if I can summarize it, another one is, this is called forgiveness. forgiveness to yourself and to others, both. Even in the Bhagavad Gita, this is mentioned so many times. If you look at the 13th chapter, the very famous 20 different gunas that Sri Krishna talked to Arjuna about. Amanitvam adambhitvam ahimsa kshantirarjavam acharyopasanam shaucham dhairyam atma vinigraha. In the very first line it is amanitvam adambhitvam ahimsa kshanti. Not shanti, but kshanti, kshama. So kakara and shakara combined together. It's a conjunct consonant called kshama. So kshama means forgiveness. So the whole Gyanankusham is Jnana Yogya Kshama, Vichara Purvakam, Vichara Margam. This is the thing. All right. Now let's go to a real first application of this verse. Okay, so what I've done is I've summarized pages number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. I didn't realize it was that much. 16, 17, 18. Pages number 2 through 18. This is how long this whole commentary went. Swami Maheshananji has gone into everything that the Vivaranam had used, every word, and expanded it. And I think we've got the gist of it. So now let's look at verse number 2. So I said that I will not pronounce every one of them. So here it says that the things for which I strive for, which are dear to me, that same striving I find in others. So I don't understand why I should get angry at others who are doing the same thing that I am doing. Let me write the Hindi. Cite the Hindi. जैसे मैं उसी के लिए प्रयास करता हूँ जो मुझे प्रिय है, वैसे ही अन्य लोग भी करते हैं, बल्कि अज्ञानी लोग कामना से अधिक ही प्रवृत्त हों, यही ठीक है। यदि मुझे परेशान करने से इन्हें प्रसन्नता होती है, तो अपनी खुशी का कार्य ये क्यों न करें? He says that in order to achieve my happiness, if I want to get at something, do something, and what I find is that others that stop me from doing it are also doing it in the same fashion for their own happiness. Just like I am striving for my happiness, the others are also striving for this similar thing for their happiness. So where is the occasion for me to get angry? We are both doing the same thing. So in that Mahatma's case, he says that I want the blanket because I'm cold. He wants the blanket because he's cold. And I am supported by my ashrama. This poor guy doesn't have any money. So he's trying to do it in the way that he finds most effective. And I find the way that is my effective. It's a wash. In fact, there is in the Nyaya Shastra, so there is a Shastra called Nyaya Shastra. So that means the Shastra where things are reasoned out. Everything is logical. We think that alone is not there. We need to find as you know, the Nyaya, the reason has to be okayed by the Vedas. But in the Nyaya Shastra, just a logical thinking is enough. In Nyaya Shastra, they say that any dosha by paksha and vipaksha are equal. So it is not a dosha. Paksha and vipaksha. Paksha means one viewpoint, vipaksha means another viewpoint. Both are equal. So in the case of the Mahatma whose blanket was stolen, he wants to protect the blanket, not everybody take it away. And in the case of the thief, he wants a blanket. And he wants to keep it in his house so that nobody can take it away. He says these are equal. They are equal. There's no reason for this. Is not enough reason for anger. You should just see that we are both striving for the same thing. And so here the example given is that suppose you make a very delicious dessert. In India we have kheer made with milk. And so sometimes the kheer, when it is made, it is left outside to cool. And so what you find is that the smell of the beautiful aroma of the kheer or any other, some halwa or some sweet meat or something like that, attracts flies. It can attract a cat, a billy. It can attract some dogs. As soon as they find there is something staying outside, they all find a way to get there. And if you get angry at them, you should understand that it is your desire to eat the kheer, and you cannot eat it because it's a little bit too hot, so you're just going to cool it down. In the case of these other animals, they don't care. They smell the beautiful aroma of the kheer and they want at it right away. So we are all equals. You can try to shoo them away, that's okay. But there's no occasion for anger because you do not recognize that we are all similar. I'm trying to do the same thing as all these animals are trying to do. What's so big about it? There is no occasion for shoka because what happens is that krodha, anger, is tantamount to become shoka. And shoka and moha are two lead to aviveka. And aviveka is the enemy of a thinking student. Our objective is to make as clear as possible about the Atma and Anatma Viveka. Always thinking about the differences. My God, the self is one which is not affected, which does not die, which does not change, which was never born. Anatma is just the opposite. It is transitory. It was born. It's going to go. It is dependent. I am independent. So this is the viveka that I have to clarify in my mind. Instead, what Krodha does is to mix them up. Continue to mix them up. They're already mixed up. But it tightens the screws even more. So this is the result of Krodha. It's like, it's interesting. There was a bank robber. And so in one of the bank robberies, he was caught. And no, this is not given in this book. I'm just reciting, I'm doing it from my own memory. So when the bank robber was caught, then he was tried. And so the judge asked him, "Sir, why did you rob the bank?" He says, "What? What kind of a question is that? That's where the money is. You think I want to rob some kind of a restroom? This is very obvious, very reasonable, don't you think?" The judge says, "You're right. You're right." So here exactly the same thing is there. You ask the billi, and "Why did you come? You just spoiled my kheer." The billi says, "Well, don't you think the kheer is very tasty?" So he says, "Exactly." So billi says, the cat, billi means cat. Cat says, "Yes, exactly. That's what I think so too." So this is Gyanankusham. That if something obstructs you, that person is doing the same thing as I am. And yes, you can take remedial actions if you are that protective of your things. But there is no reason to get angry. Keep your anger under your control. It is reasonable. This Swamiji has mentioned another occasion. All these stories come up. So it says there was a Mahatma that was just sitting there, just studying, and all of a sudden the door opens up and there is a guy with a revolver, and he says, "I know you have a safe. Where is the safe?" So the Mahatma says, here are the keys. So he opens the safe, cleans it out, and he's rushing out. So he says, "Sir, before you go, can you do a couple of things?" So he says, "What?" He says, "Close the door of the safe, lock it, and give me the keys." So the thief said, "What?" So he says, "Okay, I will do so." So then he was ready to leave. Then he says, "Oh, one more thing. Can you say thank you to me?" Thief said, "Thank you. Is that okay? Can I go now?" He says, "Okay, go now." So the thief was caught. And so the magistrate talked to him and he said, "Sir, did he rob you of all the things? He says, yeah, he did. He cleaned out my safe. And do you recognize these things that belong to you? He says, yes, these things do belong to me. So he says, I'll give you back them. And isn't this what should be, how should we punish this guy? He says, no, don't punish him. He wants some things. And he was actually quite polite. He said, thank you to me. Judge said, he said, thank you to you. He says, yes, it's a fact. He said, thank you. And he just walked out. So the judge gave him some slap on the wrist. This is the behavior of the Mahatmas. And our objective is to become one like that. Right now it might look like, what? No way am I going to be that kind of a person. But the way we think, and there'll be more examples of something like this, is the way we think can have a tremendous difference in our continuing to go in the Sanmarga, on finding peace in our own self. Praptasya prapti. So with that, I close the class, the first one. And let's see how, I may not have all the examples, but I'll give you the gist of it so that you get a sense of what this book is all about. Om Asato Ma Satkamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Om Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Harihi Om. Okay, good. Nice to have you all here. I think what I would probably ask for is that as we proceed along this text, you can give me some feedback as to, are you finding it useful in the way you are in your life or not, that you cannot relate to all of this. So some comments from you would be helpful, because I'm not sure how you would perceive this rather unusual book, but I thought this would be a change in looking at some practical aspects of looking at our lives, apart from the study of the Vedantic truths. So that's why I chose this, and after that we'll go back to something else. So anyway, so let me know if you're okay with this. All right. There's no questions. Then I would take your leave, and hopefully we'll see you next week.